Hi and welcome to Jessie James Beads. My name is Jem and also welcome to the Southern Shores. How do you fancy making a really beautiful long drop earring with me? How about we head down to the board and we'll take a look at the project and then we'll make it together. Today we're working with the Magical Mystery Bead Box for June 2025. Welcome to the Southern Shores. I like sun surf earrings, sun surf beads, and we are going to be using products from the Sunrise, Sunburn, Sunset Repeat collection. I've grabbed a couple of spacers and a bead cap. I've also added in an earring finding. Going to be working with the Shell Drop from Oh Shell Yes. Such a beautiful piece. And I've also got some lovely Heshy beads from the Feeling Salty strand, which I've just de-stranded to make life a little bit easier. This is the earring that we're going to be making together. Now, I think you know I like a really long earring. You can obviously make just the top part if that's what you prefer. It's a really cute design and it's based on a technique from beading called the ladder weave. So let's just pop that one down in the corner and then I'm going to grab in some wire. I have a 10-inch length of 20 gauge round wire. I'm working with a raw copper, which is very similar to a medium temper, medium to soft perhaps. And I'm just going to begin by running finger and thumb across that wire a handful of times, about 4 or 5 times, just to make that nice and smooth and fluid and ready to work. I'm also going to be using one of my absolutely favourite tools of the last year or so, which is my memory wire finishing plier. Absolutely divine little thing this. We're going to grab that wire length in approximately the middle, doesn't need to be exact, and we're just going to make a loop by crossing those 2 wires over so that you get this nice loop on a line kind of shape. Now before we go any further, we're going to add on our gorgeous shell. So to make this a long-lasting piece of jewellery, I would say grab your favourite flat facing pliers, I'm using my bent chain nose pliers, and give the bottom half of that loop a nice little squish. Just open and close a handful of times. Be careful if you're worried about marking it, you could use a nylon jaw plier. And then we're going to slide that lovely shell design down onto the bottom middle of our piece. Now I'm just going to then pull very gently to just tighten that up ever so slightly. I used the 2mm pin on my memory wire finishing pliers, but you could use round nose pliers or your bail makers if you prefer. The next thing I'm going to do is to load 7 of those beautiful turquoise oceanic blue Heshy beads onto each side. Now I won't make you watch me do that because I am the world's most hopeless at putting beads onto stranding material, but it's 7 on one side and 7 on the other side, and I'll meet you back in just a moment. I've added 7 of those Feeling Salty beautiful turquoise colour beads onto either side of that loop where the beautiful golden enhanced shell sits at the bottom. Now for the next part, what we're going to do is very gently start to curve this wire around, and what we've done is we've used quite a nice soft wire so that we can just get a nice arcing shape to begin. And can you see what I'm doing is I'm just pushing the beads gently to create that arc, and what you'll notice is there are gaps between the beads. We don't want a seamless serpentine look, we want those gaps to appear. So once you've got the bottom half of that shape formed like a great big U, we're going to cross the wires over at the top with one of the spacers from the Sunrise, Sunburn, Sunset Repeat set. So slide that onto one of those wires, curve them over at the top gently, and slide the other wire in the opposite direction, so they are going to cross over. And this is again why we've used a slightly lighter wire. So we just want to be nice and gentle and bring that down slowly, and as we get closer to the finish point, we're just going to gently wiggle those wires into position. Now this is based on a technique I looked at years and years ago when I first got into making jewellery, which is a ladder weave, where you start at one end with a loop and you'd pop your clasp in, and then you'd have your material, your threading material, or your beading wire going in opposite directions and loops with a bead in the middle. It's a technique that I absolutely adore, but I don't tend to do very much now as I work primarily with wire. So I thought I'd have a go and see if it's possible to do that with wire to generate attractive jewellery, and I think these are really, really cute. If you feel that these are too long for you, you can forego adding the shell on, have them on their own earring findings by themselves, and then you can either put a teeny tiny bead or just leave that loop plain at the bottom. So we've got 7 on either side down at the base here. I'm now going to add 5 on either side, and again I won't make you watch me thread small beads because I'm sure it's quite painful to watch. So I'm going to put 5 on the right hand side and 5 on the left hand side. And so we're going to follow the exact same protocol as we did for the lowest segment, only this time it will be slightly smaller with those 5 beads. So it's kind of important that those 2 wires are crossing over in completely opposite directions to begin with, before we very, very gently just start to make the U shape first. And you certainly could use a little less wire if you like. It makes it slightly easier when you're crossing the wires over at the top, but I like to have a little bit more wire than I need just in case of contingencies. I might suddenly decide I want really, really long earring drops, in which case I'd have to start again if I didn't have that spare wire. So can you see how there's a little bit of naked wire just here on the left hand side of that loop? So we're just going to push that through to make sure that our little section is nice and tidy before we move on to the next piece. Again, we're going to be crossing over up at the top, so you can draw those 2 wires up at the top opposite to one another. We're going to go for another one of those spacers, and really any of the spacers from that collection of metallics would be fine as long as you can get 2 of that 20 gauge wire through. So again, I'm just very gently pulling that into position. As I get closer, I'm going to start controlling that wire a little more. So I want it to come round in a nice oval-ish shape. And we're going to get that to sit down really neatly. So for the last loop up at the top, we're going to add 3 beads on either side. And again, I won't make you sit and watch me do that. So let's just pop one of those on. And then we will add 3 on either side. For this next section, we're going to employ a technique I almost never use in wire work. We're going to twist those 2 wires together. So just take a moment to make sure that everything is sitting how you want it to. The fact that it's wire and not beading thread gives you a little more control on how things are going to sit. And then what we're going to do is to arc those around again in a little bit of a U shape, with one of those wires crossing over the top of the other. Just making sure that everything is sitting nice and spaced and you're happy with how that looks. You can just push those beads ever so slightly closer down to that spacer midpoint, cross them over up at the top, and then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grip across that top loop, just make sure everything sits nicely, and I'm just going to turn it as if it's a key. So I've now locked my design together. What we're going to do now is to just very softly bring those 2 wires together and twist one more time, and then just smooth that away. We just need that to be a little bit tighter than it is so that we can get the bead cap on over the top. So the fact that one wire is slightly longer than the other is actually of benefit because it means I can kind of wiggle that bead cap until it goes on. So it's a little bit tight, but we can get that down to sit at the top of the design and hide that little bit of wiggle. So I'm going to choose the longer wire and make that the straight and upright, and the slightly shorter wire, if there's any difference at all, is the one I'm going to wrap around. So I'm going to draw that sharply away to one side to begin with. And then I'm going to wrap the shorter wire around the upright wire around 4 times. So that's once, twist over the top twice, twist again 3 times, and then carefully twist for a 4th time. What you don't want to do is to pull too hard so that you bend that long upright wire. We're then going to trim that piece of wire away. Piece of wire of this length, about 1.5 inches, is infinitely useful for making small spiral charms or for hand making head pins. So do keep hold of that rather than discarding it, and then we'll just tidy up that sticky uppy bit. Very, very softly control that into position, and then we'll have a look and see if there's a preferred side. You may like to see a specific part of the shell if you're making them to match. I think that actually looks fine as it is. So what we're going to do now is to draw that upright wire sideways. Let me just take a moment to make sure that that end is down against the core wire smoothly. And then I'm going to make a wrapped loop up at the top here. Again, using my favourite little friends, those memory wire finishing pliers. So I've made a loop that sits at the top of that little stack. And I'm going to give that a quick strengthen, careful not to press anywhere those wires cross over. And then I'm going to double wrap over the top of that small spiral wrapping we just made. So that's 1 wrap, 2 wraps, 3 wraps, and then we'll take that 4th wrap all the way around. Just adds a little bit more strength and structure to the top. And then on the rear side of that design, we'll trim away any excess wire using the flush side of those cutters. Just taking a moment to make sure that that end section sits down as flush and smoothly as possible. All that it remains then to add on to your sun surf earrings is to add in your favourite style of earring finding. So let's just open this up sideways. Make sure that it faces the correct way. Classic me is to put it the wrong way round on my earring findings. And then let's have a look and see how closely they match. That's good enough for the other side of the head, I believe. My name is Jem, this is Jessie James Beads, and today we have been working with the Magical Mystery Bead Box from June 2025. Welcome to the Southern Shores.